Now, this clearly is a movie that everybody wanted. And I mean everybody wanted. Am I right, guys? Welcome back to Access Blockbusters, and if I offended you by that, I'm sorry. If you love Solo, a Star Wars story, I am sorry. I'm not here to bash on the movie, I promise. In fact, I actually do have a lot of good things to say about this film, so stay tuned for the video. And don't click off just because of that little joke. I was just having some fun. Anyways, if you haven't subscribed and joined the Access Blockbusters crew, well, please make sure to do so. Give this video a like, comment down below with your thoughts on Solo, a Star Wars story. We are chugging our way through the Star Wars movie franchise. I'm watching all of the Star Wars live-action movies again, and maybe the Clone Wars movies as well. Movie singular, I should say. I don't know why I said movies. But anyways, we're making our way through, and we're re-examining all of the different films in the Star Wars franchise to see how I feel about them now. It's been a few years since I've seen most of these movies, and to be quite honest, the fandom, the Star Wars fandom, it's gotten to a point where I just don't know what to think anymore because people are yelling at each other and screaming at each other, and I wanted to take a step back and just drown out all the noise and watch these films for what I think they are to me. So that's what we're doing here, and today we are reviewing and re-examining Solo, a Star Wars story. The video obviously contains full spoilers ahead for Solo, so if you haven't seen the film, come back later after you've seen it. I do actually recommend the film. It's pretty enjoyable, and let's get started. So, you can't talk about Solo, a Star Wars story without talking about all the controversy that happened before it. So I'll touch on it briefly just to give context of the film itself, and then we'll dive into the story of Solo. So, if you guys don't know, Solo, a Star Wars story had a pretty troubled production. What happened basically was that Disney and Lucasfilm hired directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who directed the Lego Movie, who directed Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and they put them on to direct Solo, a Star Wars story. Now, Lord and Miller have a very distinct style from everything that I've heard. They have a way of making films that seems to have worked for them in many instances, but it seems that Disney and Lucasfilm, for whatever inexplicable reason, I guess just wasn't aware of that, and so actually fired them in the middle of production of this film, which is crazy. The film had already been partially shot, and they were just like, hey, we didn't realize that you were going to make a movie that was a Lord and Miller movie. Which, might have been a communication error. I have no idea, honestly, what happened. I'm not going to speculate on that. But Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they were fired. And Ron Howard, acclaimed director, was brought on to finish Solo, a Star Wars story. So, yeah, on top of the fact that Alden Ehrenreich was cast to play a younger Han Solo, which, is an incredible burden to begin with already, this film had a lot going into it to start with. There was a lot of baggage, let's say. But again, stripping away all the baggage and just looking at the movie that they gave us. Because, context is important, yes, but I also think that just looking at what the final product was, we'll talk about a movie in the next episode in Rogue One that I think succeeds despite a lot of troubles in the production and development. But again, just looking at the final product, I think, is even more important than looking at all the context behind it. So, let's look at Solo, a Star Wars story for Solo, a Star Wars story. And I'm going to just be honest right up front, I think this is a good movie. I think it's a fine movie. Now, when I had originally seen it, and actually, to be quite honest, I think I only saw this movie once before. That's part of the reason I'm doing this rewatch series, is because some of these Star Wars movies I've seen maybe once or twice, many, many years ago, but I know the lore, obviously, and I'm much more invested in the story and the canon of Star Wars than the actual movies, so it was quite refreshing to see this movie again, because the first time I saw the movie, I remember being mildly entertained, but I think I had gotten swept up in all the backstory and controversy behind the film, and so I think I didn't enjoy the film as much as I could have. And this time around, I just watched the movie and liked it. I think it's a good movie. Now, there are a couple caveats to that, and we'll get to those as we move along the story, but like I did with the first 3 episodes with the prequel trilogy, I'm just going to go through story beats and kind of talk about different things along the way. So let's get started. First of all, we start on Corellia, and we're introduced pretty quickly to our 2 leads, played by Emilia Clarke and Alden Ehrenreich in Qi'ra and Han Solo. Now, Emilia Clarke, I think, does a pretty good job fitting into the Star Wars universe. I think that, obviously having been a part of Game of Thrones and then now being part of the MCU and then being part of Star Wars, I think she does a good job fitting into whatever franchise that she is a part of. And I think Star Wars is no exception. I think that she plays that charismatic but troubled character pretty well, I think. And skipping ahead, I think her betrayal at the end of the film, I don't think actually came out of left field. I think that was pretty decently set up, just by the way that her character was acting and the writing. So I have no problems with Emilia Clarke's Qi'ra. And honestly, if they were to make a Crimson Dawn spin-off or movie or whatever, which we'll talk about that later, I would really enjoy that. But I wouldn't be surprised or upset at all if Emilia Clarke showed up again. Now, Alden Ehrenreich. Let's talk about Alden Ehrenreich, because, yeah, that's the big thing in the movie, right? Do I think that Alden Ehrenreich is a good Han Solo? Well, it's hard to say, because honestly, I watched the movie, right? And I see that Alden Ehrenreich in certain parts of the film he's trying to imitate a lot of Harrison Ford's mannerisms, and you can really tell he's putting a lot of effort into it. And that honestly might be the problem, is that I think you can tell he's putting a lot of effort into it. And I don't think that this is Alden Ehrenreich's fault, because he is a good actor, for sure. I just think that he's not Han Solo, and that's okay because Harrison Ford is Han Solo. It's very rare that you get an actress like the actress who played young Leia in Obi-Wan Kenobi who seems to have that similar embodiment of the character that Carrie Fisher did. And, I mean, granted, the difference, I think, between that and this is that, well, in Obi-Wan Kenobi, Leia is, 10 years old? And even the actress, I think, is younger than 10 years old, at least when the series came out. And so you have this, 10, 15-year age gap, and it allows you to kind of disassociate a little bit. Now, I don't remember the exact gap between this movie and A New Hope, but it doesn't feel like it's that long, Like, it feels like this is a version of Han Solo that is meant to be very close to the one that Harrison Ford is in A New Hope. And it might just be the voice, it might just be, I don't know, the way that he acts overall, that this just doesn't feel like Harrison Ford to me. Now, the first time I saw this movie, that bothered me a little bit, because, I mean, it's Solo, a Star Wars story. But if you just look at this as a film, I mean, this is a fine character, played by a good actor who is giving a good performance. It's just not quite Han Solo to me. The performance, it just doesn't evoke that character, which is interesting because I think everything in this story, minus a couple little things here and there, is the character of Han Solo, if that makes sense, but just not the performance. So if I look back through Star Wars canon and try to plot out Han Solo's life from beginning to end, this chapter in his life fits pretty neatly into who I think the character is. I think just growing up to be a scoundrel, but also having that heart of gold, that kind of thing, it's a pretty good transition piece from, I'm sure, when he was a child to where he is in A New Hope. I just don't see it as Ehrenreich, I see it as Harrison Ford. But I think that the story beats and the character beats, I think they work pretty decently well. Again, with just a few little things here and there. And, I mean, we can talk about one of those things right here. Solo comes from the fact that he is alone and doesn't have a family name. It doesn't bother me as much as I think it bothered a lot of people, although that might change. I mean, we saw how midichlorians, I wasn't really bothered by midichlorians when I was a young kid, but now I am, so maybe this will bother me a lot later on. But, yeah, it's not great. He could have just kept his name, anonymous. It didn't have to be this big backstory with the Imperial officer giving him his last name. I don't love that. I also don't love how much they refer to the dice. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't really care about the dice. I mean, really, this movie works when it's not trying to explain every little thing about Han Solo. I think Han and Chewie meeting up, it's cool, it's fine. But everything else is, I don't know, it's kind of unnecessary. But again, the opening chase scene on Corelli, it's pretty exciting. I didn't have a lot of complaints with it. I think that the color palette might have been a little muted for my taste, but I mean, this whole movie just, I don't know, it kind of has a little bit of a muted kind of taste to it. But it was fine, and it sets up the character of Kira and her relationship with Han. And now, obviously, Han and Kira get separated, and that becomes a big point of contention throughout the film. I think that it would have served them better if, I don't know, the separation hadn't been for so long, because Kira kind of shows up and she's this, I don't know, different character. I mean, it's implied and it's obviously explained that, she became a part of Crimson Dawn with Darth Maul and all that sort of stuff. So it would change a person. I just think within a movie, jumping from the first time you see the character to the next time, like 30 minutes later in the film, it kind of takes a little bit of time to adjust to the fact that this is basically a different version of that character. But, I mean, it's a minor complaint. And then from there, I mean, Han is on his own. He's fighting with the Empire, but he tries to defect. He meets Tobias Beckett, he meets Val, and he meets Chewbacca, obviously, with Rio. And, I mean, all that stuff, there's not a lot there, to be quite honest. I think that the Han and Chewbacca stuff is interesting. I would have also preferred maybe a little bit of a different backstory than Chewbacca was eating people alive, is the implication, I think. Then maybe just, I don't know, Chewbacca was some sort of bounty hunter or something, and Han met him and saved his life or something. I feel like that would have been a little bit better, but again, just it's a minor nitpick. And I do think that Ehrenreich's chemistry, if you will, if you can call it that, with Chewbacca, I think is good. I think it's more evocative of Harrison Ford's with Chewbacca than actually on the same vein in a parallel way. But anyways, they got their crew, so they're going to go get the coaxium, and there's this fun train sequence. I think the train sequence is pretty well shot, actually. I think I like the really inventive way of the train kind of rotating around the tracks. I think that visual works pretty well. And, I mean, it's really early in the film, but you have Val die and you have Rio die, and it's meant to be sad. I liked Rio because Jon Favreau, obviously, but I didn't really care about Val or really the character of Rio that much, so I don't know if it was the movie trying to get us to care about these characters when they killed them off eventually, or if it was just kind of the movie killing off these characters more so for Han and Chewie and Beckett, but it didn't really land emotionally, and I don't know if it was supposed to or not. And you are also introduced to this character of Enfys Nest. And I mean, again, this is one of the problems of the movie. I think one of the more significant problems of the movie is that Enfys Nest is introduced almost as the primary antagonist, and then she doesn't show up until the end, and she is the good guy. I think this character by far is the weakest in the film, and just the characterization and the character arc of Enfys Nest, it doesn't make a lot of sense to, I don't know, she's almost like a plot device at a certain point, because it's clear that the main villain is Dryden Voss, played by Paul Bettany. I think Paul Bettany, again, does pretty well to integrate himself into the Star Wars universe, and I think that his chemistry with Woody Harrelson, who I think is pretty good in Solo: A Star Wars Story. I forgot to mention that up front, but I think Woody Harrelson gives a pretty good performance as Tobias Beckett. And so now they're on another mission to get coaxium because, I mean, they didn't get the original shipment of coaxium. And again, by this point, I mean, it's about a third of the way through, maybe halfway through, and it's fine. I mean, it's not great. It doesn't feel super consequential. It just feels like a little bit of a, I don't know, self-contained Star Wars heist film with somebody called Han Solo who isn't really Han Solo, and that's fine. I mean, it's not Solo: A Star Wars Story, I think, but it's fine. And then you meet Lando. And again, while I don't think that Donald Glover is Lando Calrissian, I think he gets about as close as you can. I know a lot of people say the same thing. And yeah, I mean, I watched the film again, and he gets about as close as you can get to Billy D. Williams in Empire Strikes Back, as I think anybody could have. So props to him for that. The game of Sabacc was really fun. I think L3 is a fine character. I think she has some funny moments, the droid does, and the whole droid rights thing. It's pretty entertaining, but she's not there for that long, and I think that if she had been there for longer, she might have overstayed her welcome a little bit. So I think her death and her sacrifice was pretty necessary to propel the story forward. And then they go to the Kessel Mines. That sequence is fun. Again, I mean, I'm skipping over, or I'm kind of breezing through a lot of the plot points because there's not a lot that happens there. I mean, you get this kind of romantic moment between Han and Kira, and the way that the movie resolves the relationship, it kind of makes you wonder, because Kira just kind of disappears, right? And I don't know, it seems like there's this unspoken kind of thing that's left off between the two of them, and it's weird because then you know the next thing that happens is that Han, I mean, not the next thing, because there's a lot of years in between this and A New Hope, but sort of the next thing for us as viewers that happens is that Han falls in love with Leia in A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, so it's a little strange, but, you know. And then they do the Kessel Run, and it's the Kessel Run, I guess. I think it's cool. It's not spectacular, but it's cool. Like, I don't have a big problem with the Kessel Run sequence. I think the giant tentacle monster is, well, I mean, is it necessary? No. I think the giant wormhole thing in the middle was pretty decent, but yeah, I mean, it's the Kessel Run, and it is what it is. I never actually had that much of an attachment to when Han says he did it in 12 parsecs in A New Hope, so it wasn't something that broke my heart that it wasn't a certain way or anything. I just, it was fun. It was cool. And then they head back and they meet Dryden Voss again. And there's this whole double crossing angle that I think is actually really cool. I think that it's really fun how you're not quite sure who to trust, right? Like Woody Harrelson's Tobias Beckett is telling Han. And there's this double cross from Kira and from Han and from Chewbacca and from Beckett and from Dryden Voss, and everyone's double crossing each other. I think that was probably the most interesting part of the film, is right at the end of it. And yeah, I mean, Dryden Voss dies, and Han kills Beckett, and they give the coaxium to Enfys Nest, who, I should mention, just kind of shows up again randomly and reveals herself to be a part of the rebellion, or the beginnings of the rebellion. Okay, fine. I mean, I don't think the character needed to be there at all, but, fine. Whatever, man. And then Kira communicates with Darth Maul, and, I mean, I'm sorry for everyone who hadn't seen the Clone Wars. That must have been a shock, because, I mean, when I saw it, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, yeah. And, I mean, this is the part where, a lot of people say, and a lot of people who love this movie, I really applaud that for you. Like, I think that's really great. I'm not one of them. I like this movie quite a bit, especially now, but I don't love the movie. So the whole make Solo 2 thing happen, I'm like, I don't need to see Solo 2, especially not now. But a Crimson Dawn Disney Plus series, which, I mean, I hope they can go really dark and underworld with it, with Ray Park and Sam Witwer as the body and the voice of Maul, respectively, as the lead. I would be so down for that. I would be totally, even an animated series, honestly. Like what happens between episode 3 and the time he dies to Obi-Wan and Tatooine. Like that kind of stuff, or at least when he shows up in Rebels. But yeah, I would be so down for that. So that's really the only thing that I would care to see again from the Solo universe. But otherwise, I mean, it was a fun film, and he wins the Falcon back at the end. And it's just a nice, breezy film. There's not a lot to dislike. There's also not a lot to love, I think. But I didn't hate it at all. I actually think it's totally fine. I really do. So again, like with all the other videos in this Star Wars Reexamined series, I'm just going to look back very quickly at the end at how my opinion changed from the first time I saw it to now, or at least the last time I saw it, but in this case, it is the first time I saw it. I've only seen the movie twice now, which is incredible to me, actually. And I think, yeah, like I said, the first time I saw it, I was just kind of caught up in all this controversy, and that's not Han Solo, and I don't think I love the movie that much, but now just seeing it, and I'm older, and I have more experience, and I've seen it through the lens of somebody who's seen the Star Wars fandom implode, and just, I'm somebody who wants to enjoy the movie for what it is, and I did. I really did. So yeah, that's a recommendation from me. If you haven't seen Solo, a Star Wars story, in a long time, and you really didn't like it the first time, I'm not going to guarantee that you're going to like it now, but I think that if you just kind of go in and want to watch something that's set in the Star Wars universe with some characters that are named Han Solo and Lando Calrissian, I mean, Lando is pretty much Lando, but, Han Solo, then I think you'll have a good time. So, what did you guys think of Solo, a Star Wars story? Let me know in the comments down below. And in the next episode, I'm so excited, Rogue One, a Star Wars story. This has always been one of my favorite Star Wars movies of all time. I am so excited to rewatch it again. It has been a long time, and I can't wait for you guys to join me on the ride. So again, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment down below, and I will see you guys in the next one.